I'm going to call this meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 21 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Acknowledging that we are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and by expressing gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, and to the invitation of the Standing Committee on Finance, the committee is meeting to commence its study on the subject matter of clauses 553 to 570 of Bill C-15, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget, tabled in Parliament on November 4th, 2025. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members can attend in person or via the Zoom application.
I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. And I would just like to remind all participants that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pour les députés présents.
For members in the room, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. And for MPs on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. I
would like to welcome back the Honourable Joanne Thompson, Canada's Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, as well as Kaylee Levesque, Interim Deputy Minister. And with that, we'll go right into opening remarks from Minister Thompson. You'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is a pleasure to be here at the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Budget 2025 is a transformational budget. We are spending less on operations so we can invest more in Canadians' future, creating high-paying careers, building our country, and growing our economy. We are ensuring that Canadian industries will be supported. Around the globe, people want Canadian seafood because it is the best in the world. It's ethical, sustainable, and the highest quality. That's why Canada exports fish and seafood to more than 100 countries. To build Canada strong, our new government is squarely focused on expanding markets to grow our fish and seafood sector, to support a strong Canadian economy. Later this year, I'll be supporting Canadian harvesters, processors, and exports at seafood shows in Boston and Barcelona to make sure Canadian seafood is on the menu for global markets. This is how we build a resilient coastal economy and generate long-term prosperity for the sector. Expanding our markets protects the tens of thousands of jobs our fisheries support in rural and coastal communities. We are taking a whole-of-government approach to find solutions and fight for Canadians. Just recently, our Prime Minister was in China, where we worked with China to remove tariffs on lobster and crab. These are extraordinarily valuable fisheries for the sector and an important step for market access for Canadian seafood. Canada is adjusting its relationship with China, the second-largest fish and seafood export market for Canada, and opening up new opportunities in trade diversification. While the recent agreement with China should enable us to continue diversifying our seafood market into the Chinese market, we must continue working to remove remaining tariffs on Canada's fish and seafood sector. We are opening markets for Canadian seafood, and meanwhile, the Leader of the Opposition is encouraging Canadians to skip our seafood. I will always stand up for our harvesters and workers. I have heard these calls for market access from harvesters on the wharves and from workers in our plants. It is why consultation is such a priority for me. It is how good decisions are made. In Newfoundland and Labrador, I launched the Food Fish Survey to hear directly from fishers on how we can make the food fishery in Newfoundland and Labrador work for them. More than 9,500 people responded and participated in the survey to have their voices heard. I have directed my department to compile the information so it can form a decision that works for the people at home. That is real consultation. The Conservatives would rather try and jam through legislation without consultation that doesn't listen to the fishers in our province and instead threatens all our commercial fisheries in Atlantic Canada by trying to make the management of fishery one size fits all. Let me turn to enforcement for a moment. Our government is committed to safe and orderly fisheries. Conservation and protection officers are doing excellent work to protect the resource and enforce the Fisheries Act. This past season, conservation and protection officers have seized thousands of traps, they've returned tens of thousands of lobsters to the water, and they've inspected dozens of facilities. CNP will continue to have a strong enforcement posture to manage a safe and orderly fishery, and I fully support the work of enforcement officers. My job as Minister of Fisheries is to make sure we are both protecting the resource and protecting the livelihoods that depend on it. So this work is still here for our kids and grandkids. It is very important to me that we identify every opportunity to get more young people into this industry because young people need to see a future in this sector. I want our communities to continue to see the benefits of the fishery. We are moving forward with consultations to modernize our fisheries on the West Coast so licensing works better and so the harvesters see more benefits from their hard work. On the East Coast, I am focused on strengthening the administration and enforcement of the inshore regulations to make sure our fishery benefit those doing the work and their communities. We want the benefits of inshore fishing to stay within independent license holders in the communities that they support. We are continuing to review the rules with industry to see where we can make them better. Consultation and collaboration is how we can deliver good fisheries management that benefits Canadians. Thank you, merci, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And with that, we're now going to begin our first round of questionings, starting with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. You were able to make this meeting on fairly short notice. I'm disappointed that you've taken the time today not to discuss the issue that was on the sole item that was on the agenda, and that's the matter of clauses 553 to 570 of C-15, but to instead take a partisan approach, an attack approach here today. Typically, this committee, for the 10 years that I've been on it, has worked toward the betterment of fisheries and fishers. So I'm disappointed that you've used this time as a partisan attack. And not one word in your opening remarks refers to the comments or to the question at hand today, and that's clauses 553 to 570. Minister, have you been briefed on the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation, or FFMC?
I have.
And have you been briefed on the government's divestment of Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation? Thank you. Madam Minister, DFO has a web page detailing the FFMC transition process or transformation process, and this web page contains a commitment stating that the Government of Canada, quote, is committed to ensuring its long-term success, end quote. Minister, considering the problems and dysfunctions of the FFMC that they've experienced as a Crown corporation, how can the Government of Canada commit to ensure the long-term success of FFMC after it is divested?
Thank you for the question. And certainly, as you know, government has made the decision to divest FFMC so that it can modernize and become more competitive. We have entered into an exclusive negotiation with a bidder. Since Government of Canada respects the confidentiality of our negotiations, I cannot share any more on this negotiation at this time. I don't know, Deputy, if there's anything that you can add.
Thank you very much, Minister. In this specific case, as the Minister noted, it is bound by commercial confidentiality, but it is with the outcome of revitalizing the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation to meet the needs of the marketplace itself and respond to inland fishers.
FFMC has lost $7.2 million in 2024 and $7.6 million 2025. Once divested, will FFMC continue to receive federal funds to sustain these kind of losses in its operations to cover the fiscal shortfall?
So I'm going to have to say the same thing to you. Out of a need for confidentiality, I cannot speak to the negotiation process at this time. And again, Deputy, if there's anything else that you want.
Obviously, you're skirting the question. So as of December 4th, 2025, the statement of the FFMC divestiture says, quote, the divestiture process was designed to reduce financial risk, end quote. Whose financial risk was the divestiture process designed to reduce?
And again, thank you for the question. And I'm going to go back to an earlier comment that the purpose of the divestiture is to modernize and make the company more competitive.
But whose financial risk is to be reduced?
And again, that is to the confidentiality of the process, and I think we need to ensure that that continues.
Is the government going to continue with the financial risk?
I will say the same thing. This process is confidential to protect all
So why do we
involved.
have you here if you can't even tell us anything about how this divestiture is going to work? How can we make any recommendations when you continuously skirt the questions that will help us make any recommendations to this? Minister, how many organizations did the federal government provide access to for funding capacity? For the divestiture process, the organizations were provided the opportunity to access capacity funding to facilitate the participation in the competitive bidding process. How many organizations did the federal government provide access for capacity funding?
I'm going to turn to the Deputy for this. I have to protect the confidentiality of all that were involved in that process. Deputy?
The number of bidders is subject to the confidentiality parameters, but all were offered the opportunity for that. And as the process brings itself through to fruition, we'll be happy to share the outcomes.
Okay, and what criteria did an organization require to access capacity funding from the government in order to participate in the bidding process? What was the criteria?
Again, it's part of the confidentiality, Deputy. I don't know if there's anything more that you can add.
There is a detailed bidding criteria that was undertaken both in terms of participating in the process itself and also to avail themselves of any willing bidders in the process of that capacity building funding to ensure the ability to engage through analysis, market development, et cetera, all of the work that would be required for due diligence, sir.
Minister, did the government consult with harvesters who had chosen not to market through FFMC in the past?
So in terms of the process, I will turn to the Deputy, but I can tell you that I met with many of those harvesters myself. I also visited FFMC in Winnipeg, so certainly I had direct consultations, but Deputy, if there's anything in terms of the more formal process you want to add.
Yes is the short answer, indeed. I know we're at time, but indeed that was part of the consultation to help inform what those criteria were and what the transformation of the FFMC needs to look like for inland fishers and harvesters to participate in that market sale.
Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Minister. The government has been taking steps to making departments more efficient and more streamlined. How is divesting the FFMC helping the government with this process?
And again, I have to be very careful around confidentiality in this process, but I will say that the intent is to modernize FFMC and to make the processes more competitive. I will add that I visited many of the communities this summer that are still part of the process, that were part of the original engagement, and certainly, the seafood is incredibly important to all of these sectors, and we need to be able to always adapt processes to ensure that we achieve what it is that we need to achieve, which is about ultimately getting the product to market. Deputy, I don't know if there's anything more you want to add.
Indeed, in seeking the mandate to pursue this undertaking, open engagements were held with harvesters, those that do engage with the FFMC and those who choose to no longer engage with the FFMC. The corporation was once held a monopsony in the freshwater fish inland fisheries, and the idea is that in an open market, being increasingly competitive was challenging, and so looking at the business model fundamentally and those who chose no longer to sell into it, what was the rationale for that, and how could we structure a process to enable that market-based engagement?
Thank you very much. Many harvesters who work in the freshwater fishery in Canada are Indigenous. While working through this divestiture, what are you doing to ensure that Indigenous harvesters will have access to markets?
Again, thank you for the question. And I have to fall back into the need for confidentiality in the divestiture process. Again, Deputy, I will add before I turn to the Deputy in this, consultation, as we've said many times, is incredibly important, and that's all involved, Indigenous as well as non-Indigenous harvesters. I don't know, Deputy, if there's anything more that you're able to add.
Indeed, the honourable member mentioned the capacity funding that was provided to Indigenous organizations who participate in the bidding process. In addition, priority criteria were established around the bidding process in and of itself, and that include Indigenous fisheries, rural, remote, and inland harvesters themselves as well, to ensure that due consideration for the unique realities of those harvesters, fishers, and the markets that they are attempting to grow and engage in.
Thank you. When the government started to look at the divestiture of the FFMC, what challenges and benefits were related to the divestiture of the corporation were looked at? What were some of the challenges that you looked at?
So thank you for the question, and I'm going to turn to the Deputy for that detail, but I do want to stress once again that the process was about being able to modernize FFMC and also allow it to be more competitive. I don't know, Minister or Deputy, if you're able to add any more. Again, it's the confidentiality, which makes it very difficult to give details, but
indeed, thank you for the question. The market parameters of losing market share on freshwater fish sales was one of the big motivators, looking at the decreasing returns and the decreasing number of participants in the FFMC itself was absolutely a driver there. We had several provinces and territories who opted to no longer participate in the structure of the FFMC, given the monopsony that I mentioned that it is structured on, favoring open market access to try to maximize the returns to individual harvesters and fishers, and that was a big driver of looking at, if the market is not bearing that, we need to transform it to make sure that the opportunities are available for fishers, but also that the corporation is meeting the market demands in export opportunities as well as domestically.
How much time? Minister, I'm going to ask you a question about food fishery now, and with the survey that was just done, when does government, or when are we anticipating to have some data would be available to the food fishery harvesters?
For the question, and I'm very proud, as I said earlier, to share that over 9,500 people participated, and that was really quite extraordinary. We are now looking at that information. I don't have a date. I don't know, Deputy, if you have one, but I can tell you that we are actively reviewing the survey, and certainly we'll share the results when that's completed.
And I also want to ask a question about, seeing that you're here, about the mackerel industry, and I spoke to a lot of fishers in Newfoundland and Labrador who think that the fishery should be reopened. Can you give me some thoughts on that, please?
Of course, and again, thank you for the question. I have spoken with both industry and harvesters, and I think I shared that when I appeared before committee the last time. We certainly take what the harvesters are saying seriously. There are eyes on the water. We have received the data from industry, and we are now reviewing that, and certainly once that's available, we will share that.
Harvesters have expressed concern that the science doesn't match what they're seeing on the waters, and they're hoping that the eyes on the water, as you said, are taken into consideration when when they look at this fishery again.
Well, and thank you, and I certainly heard that loud and clear. I firmly believe in consultation, which is why we asked for industry to share their data with us, and that is now being considered, and they'll be part of the conversations as we look at both and move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carners. Next, we're going to go to, prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour 6 minutes.
And now Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Minister. Happy to see you again. I hope you can hear me well. So there's an important electoral promise that was made by your leader, namely to have a fisheries fund set up for the Atlantic and to boost this for the Atlantic Fisheries Fund and also for the Quebec Fisheries Fund. I'll talk about the Quebec Fisheries Fund to try and understand what's happening, because as I've moved around and talked with people unanimously, people are really asking for the Quebec Fisheries Fund to come back. Unfortunately, it's expiring on the 31st of March, and no dollars have been announced in the last budget on this. Last January, I was with the Quebec Association for the Fisheries Industry, and a unanimous resolution was voted on to ask for the Quebec Fisheries Fund to continue, and it's being asked for from the fisheries associations and also from institutions such as Marinov Scientifique, and also from those in the industry. And there's several groups that are waiting on the north shore for ramps to get back into the water and also for the lobster to better study the seabeds. So the fisheries industry is ready to modernise. They want to innovate. They want to move ahead, but they need the fisheries fund to do all of this. So I'd like to know why, in spite of the fact that this has been promised, there has still not been any money announced being put into the Quebec Fisheries Fund.
Question. I do want to share that this budget is very important for Quebec. Funds for an airport, naval shipyard, the Shark Pavilion, support for small craft harbors in your riding. I do need to know that you voted against all of this. I do know that the fishery fund is incredibly important. I'm very well aware of that. I also, will share that obviously, as you mentioned, that the funding is available till the end of March, and certainly will share any other information that becomes available. But I do understand that it's very important for industry.
Vous disiez dans vos remarques d'ouverture que vous...
You were saying in your opening comments that you want to support the fisheries industry to innovate, and the Fisheries Fund is the right tool to do that. So why is there not any money announced to actually relaunch this Fisheries Fund?
Thank you. And, I will go back to the broader items in the budget that were very important for your region, things that you lobbied for that were in the budget. And do need to reference again that you did vote against all of them. I will, again, reiterate that the Fisheries Fund, I understand, is incredibly important. We do have funding in place till the end of March. And I certainly will let you know if anything changes in the coming period of weeks.
Est-ce que cette promesse électorale, Madame...
So on this electoral promise, is it still valid or has it been dropped by your government?
I will tell you that I understand it is incredibly important. I hear that from all stakeholders. I certainly hear it from my own colleagues and in meetings like this. I bring that forward. We have funding in place till the end of March, and if anything changes, I will certainly share that immediately.
Donc, vous poussez, vous aussi, pour le...
So you're also pushing for this to be refinanced?
What I will say is that I actively advocate for all things that I hear from harvesters, industry, all participants in the fishery. It is important that I do that. When I speak about consultation, I take that process seriously. I review what I hear. If we need to incorporate it into science processes, we've just mentioned mackerel fishery in Newfoundland and Labrador, we will do that. If it means that I advocate within government, then I will do that as well. I reiterate that I know clearly that this is very important.
Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec moi, Madame la Ministre? Donc...
Do you agree with me, Minister, that it would be unacceptable and almost unpardonable at this point in time with this uncertain global context? We have to make sure that our fisheries industry actually reinforces its capacities and is being promised to replenish the fund and also increase this by 20%. So it would be unacceptable if this was not done. Do you agree?
I hear what, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I will go back to my opening point. There were many items in the budget that were incredibly important to your region. I know you spoke to me about them prior to the budget being released, and I do have to note that you voted against all of them. So I work on all of these items. They're all important, and I advocate for every region in this country.
Mais le fonds des pêches, le renflouement.
But the replenishing of the fisheries fund was not in the budget. And that is an important lack.
Still have voted against the budget.
Le budget a passé, puis les investissements qu'on...
The budget was adopted and the investments that we've had for Explorer-Mer, that's a good public policy, and I congratulate you for having been sensitive to what's happening in Quebec. But the Fisheries Fund is running dry. Quebec is ready to jump in. There's a timing question as well, because if one day this opens up and your promise is realised and this is replenished, then there still needs to be an agreement reached with Quebec, and we'll lose out on precious months, don't you think?
We still have funding till the end of March, and if there's any change, I'll let you know.
Merci.
Monsieur Deschênes, et ça nous complète le premier tour
So that rounds off the first round.
for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for appearing today. To the Minister, you know, it's been 10 years of Liberal mismanagement of the Freshwater Fish Corporation, and quite a large number of harvesters depend on this corporation to purchase and process their fish, especially in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Do you know what the percentage is, Minister?
Turn to the deputy.
I think
for
you
the
should
exact
know that,
number.
Minister. It is a very important thing. You're divesting of it. You're depending on your budget to bring in a massive change to the fish harvesters of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, especially.
I will turn to the deputy for the exact numbers, but I certainly will.
That's fine. We'll have the deputy in the second half. So, how should the fish harvesters of the inland fisheries have any trust in what's going to happen to them? You know, do you remember what happened in Newfoundland, Labrador when FPI was similarly divested of?
So what I can say, and thank you for the question, is if we've already stated there were full consultations. We are into the negotiations with bidders, so there is a need for confidentiality to actually protect all parties involved. But the intent is to modernize.
So how many bidders? How many bidders were there?
I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to say, to be
Well,
quite honest.
if I know there were 11, how come you don't?
It's not a question, Mr. Small, of knowing. It's what, in light of the confidentiality.
With the big secret here?
So there are processes in place to protect all bidders and protect, under Government of Canada, the process of the divestiture process. So I can share very high-level information with you at this point. You're certainly welcome to ask the deputy in the second half, but I'm not able to provide detailed information.
So Conservatives support divesting of federal corporations and ending outdated federal monopolies, of course. But given the record of failure and the lack of transparency around buyers and transition plans and erosion of trust amongst fishers whose livelihoods are affected, why should anyone believe this divestiture will be handled competently?
So thank you for the question. What I can share with you is that I was in many of the regions this summer. I met with harvesters. I visited FFMC, met with the entire senior team, and it was very helpful for me in understanding the need to modernize, the need to ensure that it's competitive. It is very important for so many of the harvesters in the area that they have an opportunity to bring their product to market.
We've had quite a few of these harvesters come to us and express their mistrust, and it seems to be the same lack of trust exists with this divestiture, or very, very close to it, as exist in the setting up of marine protected areas, where your government is committed to shutting down 30% of our oceans to our fish harvesters by 2030. And witnesses before this committee have warned that these decisions risk removing large portions of viable fishing grounds that directly impact their fishing livelihoods and the well-being of their families. You were able to respond to an invitation to this committee on this particular topic here today, of which you mentioned zero in your opening remarks. Would you be able to commit to us today that you'd be able to give us a fast decision to appear at our ongoing study on marine protected areas in the next couple of weeks?
I can certainly tell you that I believe we need to protect our ecosystems, and at the same time we need to protect our fisheries. I believe in consultation. I'm pleased that you're having a study that's before this committee to look at marine protected areas.
Minister, we have representatives duly elected to represent those coastal regions that are going to be impacted by the decision that your government's made to choose the United Nations over the livelihoods of fishing families. Will you commit today and let us know that you care as much about the livelihoods of coastal communities that are going to be impacted by your decisions with setting up these marine protected areas to suit the United Nations? Do you care as much about that as you do about the decision you made to come here so quickly?
Mr. Small, I assure you, MP Small, I assure you that I believe in consultation, and I certainly make myself available to this committee when asked, and I will continue to protect the
you come
need
to the MPA
to consult.
Study?
That's for my team
Come
to see
on.
whether it fits. But
You're the boss.
I am not going to play games with something that's very important to harvesters. It's very important to regions. We can do more than one thing. We can protect fisheries. We can protect our habitat. This is about.
I'm going to have to jump in here.
I will.
We're well over time, Mr.
Thank you.
Small, so we're moving on here.
Thanks, Minister.
Next, we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. A question to the Minister, and it should be clear to anybody that's in the room or maybe watching this. The reason we're narrowly studying this part of the budget was because the Conservatives and the Finance Committee, by motion, referred only this part to this committee to review. And Minister, give me a general comment on. Obviously, senior officials in your department briefed you on taking the steps that you are considering doing with this particular corporation. What was the basis for recommending to go in that direction?
And thank you. Thank you for the question. And I need to stay in a very narrow space because I have to protect the confidentiality of the divestiture process. But I can tell you it is the need to modernize, and it is the need for this organization to be competitive. Harvesters depend on the ability to get the product to market.
When would it have last been looked at by the department, specifically in attempting to preserve it for the benefit of the fishers in the future?
I don't have that date,
If
Deputy.
you could provide it back.
I'm happy to provide.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Madam Minister. In your opening statements, Minister, you referenced enforcement in CNP. And, you know, certainly the opposition has given us latitude to move beyond the narrow scope of the reference here. But could you, for the benefit of the committee, give us an overview, a general overview?
There's a point of order.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if the matters that Mr. Morrissey just referenced were in camera or were they public?
That wasn't on
Is
the
he
order.
disclosing discussions that were meant to remain private?
I'm not sure what the point of order the member is raising here.
Things that are discussed in camera, are they allowed to be brought forward to this committee?
What was discussed in camera? Chair, I fail to see where the member's coming from. I'm talking about generally and going to, you referenced protection, conservation and protection. My question was to give the committee a general overview of where the department was and where it's at today as it relates to protection and conservation, the ability of the department to effectively protect the fisheries on all coasts and in the inland waters.
And I can share certainly that since I became minister, I've been working with the department on key issues around staffing and recruitment, CMP officers. I take this very seriously. I've been very clear that unauthorized fishing is not acceptable. And to that end, I want to thank the conservation protection officers for the work that they've done. It was really quite extraordinary. They have seized thousands of traps. They've returned tens of thousands of lobsters to the water, and they've also inspected dozens of facilities. And I think that's a very important step forward and really does set us up well for the upcoming season. But I want to thank the officers for what they've done.
Could you give to the committee a sense of where you see the department's focus on conservation and protection going in the immediate year coming and in the future?
So certainly to align with the need to have authorized fishery, to have a safe and successful fishery for all involved. I think it's important that we continue to support the work of enforcement. That continues. It is important that officers have the tools that they need to be able to continue to do the work. But I also want to say that there, again, back to consultation, it is important that we continue to still sit together, and I do that regularly. I meet with harvesters, whether it's on a wharf or it's in a meeting room, but we have to all of us work together, and that's how we'll have a productive and safe fishery for all.
Time, Chair. Again, going back to, you touched briefly on your support for the Fishery Fund and how important it is to supporting a lot of initiatives within the fishery. Could you expand on that a bit? And when, if the budget is approved, does that move us closer to having funding for that important fund?
So what I will say is I hear loud and clear that, and I've certainly seen for myself, the funding has been incredibly important, not just to the Atlantic region, but in different names, but across the country. That the funding is in place until March, but I do know it's incredibly important. And if, at any time there's additional information to share, I'm happy to do that, and I will.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Morrissey, et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour...
And now Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Madam Minister, I'd like to call on you to collaborate when it comes to Atlantic salmon. In Quebec, Atlantic salmon is an important industry, 26 million, and the 2023 and 2024 seasons were a real cause for concern because there were not very small fish coming over. And so I was asked for a meeting, and the most valid theory is that there's increased mortality in the Belle-Île Strait. So they've made a request to your department last year to make sure that fishery officers have the power to take the accidental catches of the smolt, which are often catches that are caught by capelin fishers, to try and do scientific testing to see where this increased mortality is coming from. The request was made last year, but there was no feedback. Can we count on your support so that this can be done for the upcoming season for Atlantic salmon?
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I certainly will go back to my team and look into this. Certainly we'll get back to you with an answer. But again, I want to stress, I believe in consultation. So to not consult isn't a decision that I would take. So let me just find out the nuances on this and get back to you.
Merci, Madame la Ministre. Autre sujet.
Thank you. Now on another subject, the exploratory lobster licenses, phase 2 is waiting to be launched, and you're the one who's going to decide if we will move on to phase 2 this summer or later. There is a strong request from people in LFA 19. They want to know as soon as possible whether phase 2 is going to be launched or if they still have to wait. So I need to know where you're at with this. In particular, what are your scientists telling you about the opportunity of opening up phase 2 of the exploratory licenses?
So I'm to turn to the deputy. If you have a timeline when that information will be available, certainly for my eyes, and then if we have more consulting that we need to do.
Dans ce moment, on fait l'analyse des données.
We're analysing the data from 17, 18, 19, the exploratory areas that you mentioned. The data has been identified and shared with the department, the DFO, and we've had a meeting with the industry before Christmas, and we're still developing the recommendations for this year. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
So we're going to go to Mr. Gunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. My colleague here, Mr. Small, your exchange got cut off. Can you confirm that you will be basically following the unanimous wishes of this committee and appearing on our study to discuss our marine protected areas, which are obviously creating a lot of uncertainty and strain among fishermen, their families, and coastal communities in my riding and right across Canada?
Thank you for the question. And what I will say once again is that I believe certainly consultation is critically important. And I think I've said this too before in committee. We need to protect ecosystems. That is the future of the fisheries for all. And I'm finished now. And then certainly at the same time, we can protect fisheries. I understand the study is happening. I think it's incredibly important that you meet with a wide range of individuals.
You be appearing, Minister.
If I'm asked to appear, we certainly will look at that.
Okay. Well, you have been asked for appear. I think that's on the record. It was unanimous of all the members of this committee. So, but as of right now, there's no commitment on your part. Is that correct? I'm just trying to get this on the record for.
Let me answer clearly. I have always been open. This is my third meeting at this appearance at this committee in a number of months. So I'm always open to present to or appear at committee.
Okay. Well, I won't take that as a commitment, but I do appreciate you appearing before this committee, including here today. A question about the FFMC. You mentioned that there is a preferred bidder for this process. Was it the highest bidder in this process? And how can we have confidence? How can Canadians have confidence that this is the best deal for taxpayers?
So I am not able to give you details simply because there is a need for confidentiality around the process. I have had updates, and I will continue to have updates on the process, but there's very limited information that I can provide because I do have to honor the confidentiality process.
So it is possible that the preferred bidder that the government is pursuing this with, it seems like unilaterally, is not necessarily the highest bidder. Why should Canadians have confidence that it is in the best interest of taxpayers then?
To be very clear, I am not providing any detailed information on the process. I believe in the integrity of the process, and I also believe that it is essential that I honor the confidentiality of that process.
Okay,
so we can continue.
That seems like a very convenient excuse to avoid accountability and transparency, but for the Canadians watching, why should they have confidence in this process?
Deputy, did you want to speak to the process itself at a higher level in terms of how we, at a very high level, move through
Minister,
this?
can you not articulate why Canadians should have confidence? I mean, it's a pretty open-ended question about the process. I understand there's certain details you might not be able to reveal, but why should Canadians and taxpayers have confidence in this process is delivering value to them?
So I'm happy to reply in writing on the overarching process without being able to divulge any particular information. So for Canadians, I believe in transparency. I think it's incredibly important. So that information we can provide, but I am not able to give you any specific detail.
Just one final question for you. In your opening remarks, you mentioned enforcement and the renewed commitment, as you would articulate it, towards enforcement of the department. A real genuine question for you here. In Kitasoo Bay, on the west coast of BC, a local First Nation group has unilaterally declared that an area is closed to fishing, gooey duck, other forms of fishing, but DFO has maintained to the fishermen and their families that it is open. So can you reaffirm, and this has obviously caused a lot of consternation and confusion among fishermen in those communities, can you reaffirm that DFO, and through DFO yourself, is the final authority for opening and closing decisions for every fishery, and reject any unilateral declarations of closing, be it from First Nations or other groups, and guarantee the rights of fishermen to access these areas that DFO says is open?
I don't directly set the work for the officers, but I'll turn to the deputy if you.
You declare what's open and closed, right? The department does, and then the officers enforce that. Correct?
And then turn to the deputy if she has a comment on this.
Correct. Without speaking to the specific case, the example that you've given, we open fisheries based on science, engagement, the advisory committee process. The decision is either taken at the regional director general level or the minister, depending on which decision in question. And then we work with harvesters, as you note, and local communities, including First Nations, to maintain peaceful, orderly access to the fisheries themselves under the conditions of license as issued.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors, or Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, my question will be directed to you, but it's fine to have the deputy. I just want you to walk us back to when the process began and what was the thinking within DFO that led them to recommend the path that the department is on now as it relates to FFC?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to turn to the director because I entered the process while it was, yes.
So, Minister, yes.
Indeed. Thank you for the question. As you may be aware, the FFMC was created in 1969 with a clear mandate as that buyer and seller of all interprovincial and export markets for inland fisheries. Over the years, particularly in the 2010 period, we saw a withdrawal of key jurisdictions from the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation.
Jurisdictions?
Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba in succession.
So all the provinces bailed on it?
The majority. Alberta remains a signatory, but is not an active participant in the sale into the FFMC. We do have an ongoing arrangement with the Northwest Territories, which represents about 5% of the total sales of the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation over the years.
Who provided the funding?
The capacity funding for Indigenous bidders was provided.
No. Who provided the funding to support FFC over the years?
So it is a commercial crown corporation, so is capitalized. They are bound by the Financial Administration Act and have to undergo annual audited statements.
So there was no direct public funds transferred to the FFC?
It was capitalized in its origin and operates as a commercial crown. I'd have to do...
It operated from its original capitalization?
It is a self-sustaining financial crown corporation.
Okay. Fine, thanks. That's clear. So again, then, the department then, could you brief us, this committee, on when the decision was made to look at the vesting and what was driving that? Was it a lack of interest from stakeholders, or what was it?
Indeed. So as previous members mentioned, we were hearing directly from harvesters that the corporation was no longer meeting their needs, and as provinces withdrew from this market structure.
So it was the fish harvesters that were requesting the divestiture?
Fishers, provinces, and looking at the changing marketplace in and of itself to have a sole responsible authority for that corporation.
How was the changing marketplace impacting it?
So it went from an idea of creating, you had the open market where the feeling was that fishers could achieve higher returns by selling on the open market versus going through the I can't say the word in English, monopsonic structure of the FFMC.
So they were bound to go through FFC?
Well, originally as signatories were there, that was the prime vehicle for that sale.
So fishers were constrained by that organization. On maybe they could have received better returns for their product outside of it, but legally could not. Is that what you're telling this committee?
As the market conditions changed, fishers started looking at other opportunities that could be available and did not want to put their money into.
So is it fair to tell this committee then, am I assuming correct, that this corporation is no longer serving the best interests of those fishers, and the fact it could be a negative on them?
Well, at this point, given that the provinces that I mentioned have withdrawn, which represent the bulk of the inland fisheries in this country, and the
and what was the province's reason for withdrawing?
That the fishers were preferring the open market access.
So the provinces responded to the fishers' request?
Removing their participation, leaving the FFMC, enabled participation in the open market instead.
Okay, from an East Coast member of Parliament, which is very different, this is news to me. So we're sitting here debating a structure that the provinces no longer support, and that fishers, from what I'm picking up from you, are not supporting as well. So they want it divested.
Indeed, this is the result. We started the transformation exercise in 2017 after the withdrawal of Manitoba in that year, looking at the outcomes, brought forward recommendations, engagements with harvesters, directly the provinces, the territories.
What would be the assets that would be available for disposal? In general terms,
there's some processing capacity, et cetera. I can't speak to the specifics because it is part of the divestiture piece, but it is definitely in the. You can see in their corporate plans there are some a small number of assets, but it is more about the marketing.
Sometimes we don't get the department is actually listening to the fishers involved and responding to their request.
Indeed.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
Indigenous, rural, remote, and inland. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Just seeing the time here, we have enough time for a short third round. We're going to do 3 minutes, 3 minutes, and 2 minutes, starting with Mr. Arnold for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in your opening remarks, you basically opened this meeting up to any questions. One of the questions I want to ask you is what come up out of New Brunswick or the Bay of Fundy area recently. Are you familiar with what a living gene bank is?
Yes.
Are you aware that your government's funding cuts will result in the closure of those gene banks that have been identified as key components of the recovery for wild Atlantic salmon?
So yes, and what I can say is certainly we remain committed to protecting species, and at the same time we need to look at new opportunities, investments that align with sustainability.
New opportunities don't come often with a gene bank like that. There's literally barely 100 wild Atlantic salmon returning in the Bay of Fundy streams. These living gene banks are absolutely crucial to retaining those living genes so that the stocks can be restored, and yet your government's actions are going to result in the closures. How can you explain that and square that circle?
So certainly I won't speak to that specific, but I will say that
speak to that specific, because you should know. You're the minister who has the ultimate decision over this closing of this gene bank.
I am committed to working with all partners to protect Atlantic salmon stocks. I know it's incredibly important. That is a priority. And we will continue to look at ways that we can that we can focus on to ensure that we have strong returns. I realize that this is incredibly important work. It's work that we need to do, and I'm committed to it.
On the West Coast, we have recreational, commercial, indigenous harvesters that are basically saying that your government has failed for the last 10 years at restoring both fisheries and fishing opportunities. The infrastructure systems that provide for those fisheries are on their last breaths because of consistent closures by your government and further restrictions. More of those restrictions may be on the way and have been indicated by your department through the proposals for coastal protection. And the harvesters, the industry, and the entire sector that relies on the access to those recreational, commercial, and indigenous fisheries is at risk. How are you going to address that in your budget?
So what I can tell you specific to the West Coast, we've just finished a round of consultations, finished on January 23rd. We are now looking at that, and certainly no decision has been made, and once that decision is made, I will share it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me, Minister and the Deputy. You mentioned modernization a number of times when you were talking about the divestiture of FFCM. Can you elaborate on what the definition and how that will be a benefit to the freshwater fishers by modernizing the corporation?
Thank you for the question. I can say at a very high level, the reality that so many harvesters are no longer working with FFMC is an indication that there is a need in the regions that are not being met. And so the need to look at the entire process, that was the consultation processes that led to the divestiture, was incredibly important. Deputy, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add.
Thank you very much for the question. As noted, when created in 1969, you imagine you've created a single desk, basically, where you have the buying, the selling, and the market opportunities that are being created. The idea being that inland fisheries individually are not as scaled, perhaps as the honourable member mentioned on the East Coast, where you have larger access in areas versus many small lakes that you need to think about how to bring that scaling of economy and number of fish to access. So moving away from that single seller as provinces moved away from the model of the FFMC because of the favouring the open market, the idea being a preferred bidder here will look at the structures and the opportunities that are available through the ongoing negotiation process and put forward a corporation or an entity that will include those inland fishers, create those opportunities for them to engage and want to sell into those channels to maximize the value of their efforts on the water.
Thank you. So Alberta, I think you said, was still part of the corporation, and I'm guessing not 100% the fishermen have withdrawn. How will the divestiture affect, say, Alberta and the fishers that are remaining there? How will that affect those?
Thank you for the question. So while Alberta has not formally withdrawn from the agreement, they have not been an active participant in the FFMC since 2014. And so at this point, the impacts would be minimal in terms of existing structures. Harvesters, fishers have gone elsewhere. And looking at forward, it would actually create ongoing, perhaps increased market opportunities through the right engagement with if the preferred bidder is successful in the process.
Much done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. Et on va terminer avec Monsieur Deschênes.
We'll finish off with Mr. Deschênes for 2 minutes. Thank you, Madam Minister. Some questions about the enforcement of the Act. We've had several December meetings on this, and at the last meeting there was a fishery officer from the Maritimes, Mr. Trevor Lushington, and I asked him if he felt free to come before us, and he felt very uncomfortable. And he said there was an employee from your department, from Parliamentary Affairs, who told him over the phone before he came before the committee, don't forget that without your paycheck, it'll be hard to pay your bills. Do you find that acceptable?
So I can say to you that I support the work that the enforcement officers do. I have met whenever I'm in a region, if the enforcement's work in that area, I meet with them directly. I have open dialogue with them. They need to have their work supported by all parties all involved. It is an important job. It enables the fisheries to move forward in a safe manner. And I can say to you, while I can't speak to that specific instance, I can tell you that the changes that have been made since I've become minister were changes that were intended to create spaces for communication within the department and within
Avec beaucoup de respect, Madame la Ministre, vous répondez pas.
With full respect, you're not answering my question, Minister. There's a fishery officer you're saying that you respect, and he came here and he was terrified to testify next to his boss, and he said that one of your employees basically invited him, or he found intimidated, and that was what he said before the committee. So how do you react to that? Do you think it's acceptable? Have you taken measures to make sure this does not recur?
I can tell you that while I don't directly interfere in the day-to-day work, I obviously sit at the level of being able to help set policies and ensure processes are in place so that all workers feel that they have the space to be able to speak their truth within their departments, express concerns, and that is very important to me. And certainly if the deputy would like to add anything, but I as much as I continue to say I believe in consultation processes, I also believe that the work the officers do needs to be respected, and they need to be able to express concern without feeling harmed. So, Deputy, if there's anything...
I'm afraid we're at time. I hate to interrupt, but Ms. Levac, if you'd like to add anything more in writing, please do that. But with that ends the first panel we have. I do want to thank the Minister for taking the time to again meet with us today. We're now going to suspend for a few minutes to allow the Minister to depart, and we'll continue with questions to the officials for the second hour. Welcome back, Ms. Levesque, as well as welcome to the table our new witnesses, Niall O'Day, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy. We've got Jennifer Sachs, Assistant Deputy Minister, Aquatic Ecosystems, Patrick Amiot, Chief Financial Officer. We have Todd Williams, Senior Director, Resource Management Operations, and we have Doug Wenzel, Regional Director General, Maritimes Region. So with that, we are going to jump directly into the first round of questioning, starting with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll go back to some of the pieces that the minister refused or failed to answer when she was here. I want to know how many organizations the federal government provided access to for capacity in the application process.
Thank you for the question, member. Apologies. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. That the specific organizations to which capacity funding was provided?
No. Just how many organizations did the federal government provide access to for capacity funding for the application?
So at this point, that is part of the commercial confidentiality. I know there have been media reports to the effect of the number of folks, but we did engage in NDAs with everybody with whom we provided capacity funding.
So out of the 2 hours that this meeting is going to take place, there was one item on the agenda that was the divestiture of the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation. We've got a dozen MPs in the room. We've got all this staff from the department. We had the minister here for an hour, and you can't tell us anything. Is that correct?
Indeed, sir. I cannot speak to the specifics of those bidders who receive capacity funding.
We as a committee are asked to make recommendations on this piece of the Budget Implementation Act. And you're providing us with zero information to make recommendations on. What information can you provide us to make a recommendation on?
Indeed, sir. Thank you very much for the question. And the specifics around the amendments that are being requested are around the enabling of the divestiture. So at this point, the process has not been concluded. This is to allow in the event of a successful outcome with that while that negotiation continues under that commercial confidentiality.
But we have been asked as a committee to make recommendations on the Budget Implementation Act clauses.
Indeed.
And you're telling us you can't give us any information to make a recommendation based on.
Thank you very much.
Is that correct? Is that correct? Yes or no?
I can provide information about the process itself, the rationale, the policy implications.
That's what I was asking. What can you provide this committee for us to base a recommendation on?
Indeed. So absolutely happy to go back to, as I was talking about, the origin of the Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation, the progressive series of withdrawals
We've seen all of that in the talking notes. What can you specifically talk to us about?
That we have taken the utmost care here. This is a financial crown corporation in a negotiation, directly commercial confidentiality. We cannot speak to that bidder's financial implications, who may be involved, et cetera, out of respect for the process and to ensure that we are in the best interest of Canadians.
And how can you expect this committee to make a recommendation on the commitment from the government on their website committed to ensuring its long-term success? What kind of a commitment can be made? Is that funding? Is that some other process? How can the government commit to something? We are expected as a committee to make a recommendation on that, and yet we have no idea what that commitment is.
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, the amendments that are requested, as I noted, would enable, based on the recommendations that we would bring forward for the divestiture, following that conclusion of the successful, if there is a successful outcome with the preferred bidder at this point.
You're asking us to make recommendations, just saying, trust us. We'll tell you the details later, but just trust us, without telling us any information. Is that correct?
Thank you very much for the question. In fact, the process that was put in place was done in an open and transparent manner. It was clearly invitations were made to all harvesters to participate in those processes, engagements with provinces and territories as well. And so what was brought forward to the process, which is now subject to that commercial confidentiality, was done in an open, transparent, and engaged manner.
This reminds me of what your government has just done around the vaccine mandate information. They've just locked up the information on that, the internal information, for 15 years. They're saying, trust us until it's all gone away. You're saying, trust us on this decision until it's all gone away. When nobody, as we as elected representatives who are here to speak the voices of the people who elect us, and you're refusing us any information to base a recommendation on.
Thank you for the question. We are bound by both the confidentiality, but the Financial Administration Act does require that we seek these amendments at this point in the process, recognizing that it is, as you say, we are in confidence and seeking those amendments in parallel to make sure that we don't further delay market access.
We've all been brought here today as smoke and mirrors for nothing, because we can't even discuss what might be in the agreement, or where it might go, or who might be protected in the future, who might not be protected, and who the potential beneficiaries are of some backdoor government deal that says, oh, we're going to maintain your success in the future regardless. I can't, in 10 years on this committee, I've never seen this kind of hypocrisy and disrespect for the committee's time in what the sham is that's going on here today. Can you provide us anything that would help us, as a committee, make a recommendation on those clauses? Other than the background, basic information we've seen on the website, we've got from the analysts doing the best they can to drag out information. Can you provide us anything further on whether we should say yes or no to this divestiture?
Thank you for the question, sir. We're very happy to go through each of the clauses and explain what that would enable, if that is of use to members of the committee, and recognizing as well the policy rationale and what's driving that and the engagement that led to this process. I
don't think we have time for that,
Understood.
But we'd be certainly happy to see it in writing.
Okay, absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Et prochainement, on va en ligne avec Monsieur Cormier.
And now Mr. Cormier online for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Perfect. Now, it seems that we're having some difficulties in getting some answers on this subject. I'll take an opportunity, as others have done in the room before, to put a few other questions to the departmental staff here. So first of all, Deputy Minister, you've come to our committee before Christmas, and I put questions to you back then. First of all, on a subject about the Canadian Coast Guard, even if it's no longer under your department, if I've correctly understood, for some months now. But there's still some aspects that are linked to fisheries in my region, and we've got a snow crab season coming up very soon, since 2018 now. From the DFO, we've had all of the necessary tools each year for the de-icing ops, and I just want to make sure that all of the contracts that have been drawn up by your department have actually been transferred to the DND, and the tools that we'll need in terms of Coast Guard boats and small icebreakers and Julia Marsh, for example, here. and also contracts with companies in my region and with the amphibian boat that we call the Frog La Grenouille. I just want to make sure that all of these tools have been set up for the next season. Could someone answer me on that question, please?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question. Yes, you're right. The Coast Guard has been completely transferred to the Department of National Defence on the 2nd of September 2025 by order, but the services that already existed between the DFO and the Coast Guard as an organisation will continue these service contracts, and we have a memorandum that's been drawn up between the two organisations at the Deputy Minister level to make sure that there's consistency and that all of these operations continue. It's very important, of course, to have icebreakers in your region and for the snow crab sector and for other sectors. So we're following that very closely with the water conditions, ice conditions, and we're working closely with a report every week from the Coast Guard on that. Perfect. Thank you. Another question that I put to you last time, it was related to the snow crab fishery licence is in Area 12 that we're leaving my region. These are very important licences for our committees, and they're of very high value. Unfortunately, the sons, daughters, deckhands and others are not able to obtain these licenses always, and also because of the rules and the residency criteria from one province to another. I'd asked you to look into this to see whether it would be possible to do something with the associations, to have some sort of working table set up. So has anything moved on this issues? Because once again, we're seeing licenses that are about to leave our region, and sales are sometimes rather doubtful, and they're going off to other regions. And that's not part of the Fisheries Act. We have to make sure that these licenses are actually contiguous to their region. So what's happening with this issue, Deputy Minister? Thank you for that question. Yes, the question of licenses that you've raised, where our DG in the region is looking at that closely in an informal way. It's before applications come in. We're also continuing to work with associations on the questions of implementation of the regulations that protect the next generation of fishers and also the owner-operator model. And I do understand this question of the economic spin-offs in your region. Now, I don't want to cut in, but Deputy Minister, are you prepared to set up a small working group together with the New Brunswick province, because provinces are also responsible for these licenses and this economic aspect? So are you ready to at least set up something, a working group, to study what's currently happening with these fisheries licenses that are leaving a region sometimes very easily, and that has a terrible impact on our regions? Are you prepared to look at this as quickly as possible? Yes, is the answer. Yes, we're ready to look into this. We're already looking at it perfect on a daily basis. And in terms of working group, I'll get back to you in writing in the committee, because we're not the only ones who are involved in that. Thank you. Final question, because I think I've just got a few seconds or a minute left. Another issue that I raised with you before, and where we've also had discussions in the committee in the former study on shrimp fishery. It is very difficult. The stocks are going down for shrimp over several years. Fishers have had to sell their licenses or completely abandon fishery activities, and a percentage of the red fish resource has been directed towards the shrimp trawlers, and the 60% that's given to the big fleets has not been fished at all over the last 2 years. So are you ready to look into this once again and have a sharing, perhaps a feeder sharing towards other fleets, so that we can allow them to survive? Because fleets that are not fishing that resource are available. So could you look into that, please, as well? Yes, we'll look at that in the advisory committee, and I do understand there's problems in terms of market access. It's a new product that's developing for certain processors and so on, but yes, absolutely, we commit to look at this through the Red Fish Advisory Committee and look at possible recommendations right down the whole line. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Cormier. So now we're going to turn to Mr. Deschênes, 6 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to talk about the decision-making process for Phase 2 of the exploratory lobster licenses. Deputy Minister, you've said we're carrying out analyses, but I'd like to have more details as to where we are at exactly, because I imagine the scientific opinion has come out. Has it already been sent, in fact? Sorry. We're continuing to look into what will be possible in terms of licenses. You're right that the data has been evaluated, but when it comes to the scientific opinion and what that will actually imply for the next phases, it's something that's still being looked at. So the data comes from the harvest plus the stock assessment, and now we're several months later on. So I understand that the Minister will have a political decision to take. But when it comes to actually managing the fish resources, perhaps Mr. Williams can answer me. Has the scientific opinion actually been sent in yet?
Mr. Chair. No, the science has not been provided. The analysis of the data has been collected. That data is being evaluated by science, and with further consultation and through our normal advisory committee processes, we'll be providing recommendations to the Minister for next season.
So have you had consultations on the basis of scientific data?
The data has been shared in terms of the number of traps and landings used. But again, the scientific data and the evaluation on what that has going forward, we'd be looking forward to receiving that advice. Notably, we would note that these catches did not negatively affect commercial harvests active in that area. And on the contrary, in fact, we did see commercial landings continue to increase in those areas.
OK. Donc, quelles sont les autres observations?
So what are the other observations that you've seen? You said in terms of catches, in general, the catches were good. But what are the other observations that have been passed on by the scientists?
Well, we look at landings, of course, as well as catch per unit effort, as well as overall or other indicators that can provide us with further data on the abundance of the stock. And we look at each zone as well. Of course, so there's 17, 18, and 19, and those landings did vary by those zones. So that science will look at that data and provide us with further information.
Les données, M. Williams, ils sont déjà colligées. Là. Êtes-vous...
So the data has already been collected, Mr. Williams. Are you still bringing in other data?
The landings data, yes, of course, we get those as the fishery progresses, and that has been tallied up towards the end of that season, and we do have that information in terms of each area and how much lobster was landed in each of those areas using those licenses. And again, it does vary between those areas and even within an area. So there's further scientific analysis that has to be examined there that we'll await and then provide a recommendation to the Minister.
Il manque pour que les parce que ça fait déjà plusieurs semaines qu'on a.
So what is still missing, because we've been waiting for several weeks and it's coming up in 3 months now, the lobster fisheries, and people are waiting to see whether they're going to go or not, and they need to have some predictability, because if they launch a second phase, these people need to get ready. Now, I understand that consultations may still be underway, but scientifically, what is still missing? Well, as Todd said, it's the question of data analysis to show what that actually means in terms of management. So we take the data, as Todd had said, there's the landings and the stocks and the effort per unit. And what does that mean in terms of recommendations to the Minister, not just for the total allowable catch, but also for the management measures in the given areas to make sure that exploratory fisheries won't have a negative impact on existing fisheries, and to make sure that it's a short-term impact and that it's co-located. Yes, I understand in terms of fisheries management there's a decision to be taken, but from a scientific point of view, what is coming out is, are there enough lobster resources to actually open up phase 2? That's the question. Thank you for that question. So we've had good landing results. As Todd has said, it's shown that we're quite optimistic with what we've seen. But how's that going to translate into recommendations for management measures? Well, that is the end of the scientific conclusion for all of the areas, and not just for exploratory fisheries. That still needs to be done. Now, for the interactions, what are you talking about? Well, that's to make sure that when we have landings in the exploratory areas, that won't have a negative impact on the commercial catches that are already in the region. Well, that's what I'm trying to understand. You scientists, if I'm decoding properly, the scientists are saying it's fine. We could open up phase 2. And now you're at the stage to see, do we have an issue with other fishers? Do we have processing capacity? Is that where you're at? The scientists have not yet talked about this. They're still finalizing the analysis, as Mr. Williams said. And when are we going to take a decision?
Very soon. Again, with all of the inputs from science and based on some consultations with harvesters.
Et on a un comité scientifique, excuse.
And we've also got a scientific committee on the 24th of February. That's the advisory committee, CSAS, and that's where we'll look at these recommendations. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes.
To go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask about mackerel. Mr. Connors questioned the minister earlier about the possibility of a mackerel reopening in 2026, and she spoke of data from fishermen, science from the fishing industry that's currently being analysed to make the decision. Mr. Williams, could you give me an example of one of these types of data that you're analysing right now?
In terms of egg sampling, for example, from science?
A type of science data that's been provided by harvesters to your department. Can you give me an example of one type of data that you're analysing right now?
Well, certainly harvesters have reached out to us, and thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair, have reached out to us, and we are having an advisory committee meeting in 3 weeks. But they have contacted us and have said, yes, based on observations, based on what they have seen, in and around.
No, but you were waiting for the industry to provide you science data, which the minister confirmed earlier this morning that her department is now analysing. So, which type of scientific data did the fishing industry collect with respect to mackerel, and how is that being analysed right now?
The industry is certainly very much actively involved in egg sampling.
What kind of science was the minister referencing?
Well, I believe it was in reference to the collaborative work that we have with stakeholders.
No, but
in terms of eggs.
Which metric would the fishing industry have provided to you?
Part of the work that they do is with respect to egg sampling, that we have samples, collect samples.
With all due respect, I think that's your scientific
in collaboration
research that collects the egg data and the larvae data. But which type data did the fishing industry provide to you that you're now analysing?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I have not seen it submitted. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Have they submitted any, in fact? The minister confirmed to us today that her department is analysing data that was supplied by the fishing industry. I'm just wondering what kind of data that was.
Again, that could have been in reference to the data that they supply.
Could it be possible that the fishing industry didn't supply any data and that the minister may have spoken out of turn on that?
Again, I think I'm looking forward to hearing the views of stakeholders in 3 weeks. I also know that the minister is party to any number of conversations that she has with stakeholders, and they do provide her and her office with information that
based on my conversations with fishing industry stakeholders, they haven't supplied any real scientific data because they hadn't collected any data and they weren't asked to collect data other than samples which they were commissioned to collect on your behalf, which is your data, not theirs. So do you think it's fair to come before this committee and tell elected representatives of coastal communities that data supplied by harvesters, science that was commissioned by their fishing industry representatives was being analyzed when there was no such work done?
I'm here to provide my best advice in terms of the information that we receive. And here, again, we're looking forward to hearing more from industry and stakeholders. And again, they are very much a part of the science that we do, and it is a collaborative effort. And so the science, which is and the samples which they provide, is an important integral part to that.
But those samples are your science.
In collaboration with industry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we've spent 2 hours here today of this precious committee's time to come and analyze the decision to privatize this Freshwater Fish Marketing Corporation. It's very disconcerting to come here to see the minister so unprepared. How could that happen? How could she come here so unprepared and not even mention the purpose of this meeting? For one syllable of her opening remark was committed to the sole purpose of this meeting. How could that be? Anyone? Deputy?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, we engage regularly with the minister to provide status updates on the divestiture process of the FFMC, and I'm happy to get into further details with the committee about both the policy objectives and the engagements that led to where we are in the process.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. A prochainement. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I begin my question, I just want the Chair give notice that I will be moving a motion covering the matter on mackerel and from the fishers. I'll provide it with you today. That speaks to a lot of the questions that the member was referring to as it comes to fisher input versus the science in the department. But I will provide that to you in writing before the meeting is over. But I want to go back to the Freshwater Corporation and to the financial officials. The divestiture process that you're following here, how long has the department been divesting of various assets? Forever?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, as it is a self-sustaining Crown Corporation, the FFMC has been managing and purchasing its assets since 1969 when it was created. But the department has played a role in the oversight there. We are responsible. Obviously, the minister has a responsibility, and they do an annual corporate plan.
This is a public process. There was notice given that and this came as a result of consultation from the fishers involved, the provinces, who are all, in your earlier answers, endorsing the steps taken by the department to divest of this corporation. But in the divestiture of assets, because some would believe that, there's some hidden agenda here going on. But how often does the department divest of assets?
Thank you very much for the question. We have a process that we follow for, we'll say, the average garden variety asset that we would divest. That is, a vehicle that is no longer in use or something. We have a very clear.
And has that been consistent over the last?
Indeed.
10, 20, 30 years?
Indeed.
So everything, you're following the same process that's been endorsed by successive governments.
And this process, in fact, has been set up with more rigor because of the independence here and to protect not only the Crown Corporation but the bidder.
Let's be clear. This is a process long established within the ministry for divesting to ensure, one, the taxpayer is protected and there's fair process and due diligence. So let's clearly establish that particular part. Thank you, Madam Minister. Madam Deputy Minister. Madam Deputy Minister, I want to go back to a question because there is enforcement and protection personnel with you today. And it goes back to when this committee was studying in an earlier study, and we were hearing from the Director of public prosecutions. And quite frankly, I was questioning her specifically, and candidly, she did not answer me. She avoided the question I was putting, and it disturbed me because it was related to, and I was very specific, egg-bearing female lobster, which is the basis of the East Coast lobster fishery. And would it be illegal if somebody harvests that lobster, whether commercial, ceremonial, or moderate livelihood fishers? Could you give this committee the department's perspective? And I would hope that it would be that in possession of a lobster, as I described, would be viewed as illegal, and that the department would prosecute or insist on prosecuting accordingly.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, and I think this was referenced in discussion earlier today at committee. Fishery officers uphold the conditions of license and the regulation. So anything that is prohibited or not authorized in condition of license, fishery officers will absolutely proceed.
Condition of any license?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. So in no shape or form.
So fishery officers uphold the regulations.
As I described, would be legal for anybody to harvest under any agreement with DFO.
Correct.
Okay. So what is the go-between between DFO and public prosecutions? Because the director clearly avoided my very specific question.
So Mr. Chair, I can't speak for the Public Prosecution Service, but I can speak for conservation protection. And again, our fishery officers are very, very, very consistent in terms of putting the cases forward, building the evidence. And if there's an offense that contradicts what's in the Fisheries Act, they will put it forward.
Thank you. Because there was...
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to jump in, Mr. Morrissey. We're at time here. Prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes.
And now we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to Atlantic salmon. The request from the Quebec Atlantic Salmon Federation is to have a directive set for fishery officers in the Detroit, Belle-Île Strait, so that they can actually get back these accidental catches of smolt and grills and carry out scientific testing. Is that possible for the department to come out with that type of instruction or directive? Thank you for that question. I'm not aware of that specific proposal to which you've referred, but we'd be happy to do follow-up on that. It's always possible to have scientific collaborative projects set up. We've already invested in the region on the Atlantic salmon population, and we're always open to consider what could be possible, but I'm not aware of that specific project to which you're referring. I understand because you weren't there, but perhaps there are others who have heard about this. It was a request that was made last year already. We'll get back to you in writing. It's not something that people know about at this table, but perhaps there have been discussions out in the region, so I don't want to talk on behalf of my colleagues who have perhaps announced that. So theoretically speaking, the department would send fishery officers a directive to actually recuperate these accidental catches and send them over for scientific testing. Is that possible in theory? Yes, our fishery officers have several responsibilities, and it's a question of operational burden, what's possible for them to do on a daily basis. So don't want to talk about that, but in terms of openness to dialogue on this, absolutely. Then a final point on enforcement to follow on from my colleague, Mr. Morrissey. What we've heard here in the Fish Committee, according to the Enforcement Director, before a charge is laid, we have not to ask whether they're part of the First Nations and ask for advice from the band chief. But there was someone who was at that meeting who said the contrary. So has something changed in the directives? Are there clear instructions that have been sent out since they came before us? Well, as we said last time I came, this is continuing. There are certain aspects of restorative justice to which we can refer and which we can use. And then there would be an interaction with the First Nations band on that. But that doesn't take away from what Mr. Wenzel said. When it's sent to public prosecution, then there's 100% referral. There's no directives. But there's several tools that we can use in the toolbox, including a restorative justice process. And I think that's what he was referring to. But of course, I can't speak on behalf of the officer who appeared before you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Go to Mr. Gunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. A question about this bidding process for FFMC. Were these bids proposals based solely on the best deal for taxpayers, the highest bid, or were there other non-monetary considerations at play?
Apologies. Thank you for the question. There was a variety of criteria that were put together in the bid, including questions around rural, remote, Indigenous access to markets as well.
Okay. And were all of the bids that were received, or were the bids restricted to Canadian-owned companies or bids? No? The capacity funding that was mentioned, I think that the minister mentioned that some organizations were provided the opportunity to access capacity funding to facilitate their participation in the bidding process. Was that capacity funding, just to clarify, to participate in the bidding process or to actually fund the bids themselves?
It's an excellent question. Thank you. It is for capacity building to participate in the process, to amounts to participate, say, in data due diligence, looking at the types. We were actively engaged with industry, and that was one of the biggest things we heard was independent harvesters not having the capital sources to just even do a data room, for example, to understand what was there, and so what capacity would be required to participate in a commercial process of this nature.
So it wasn't actually to fund the actual bids? Okay. And was the capacity funding in the form of grants or loans?
Grants.
In grants? Do you know how much in total the government spent in providing capacity funding to various bidders?
Not at this point, but we can provide it once the process has come to conclusion.
Okay. A couple other questions. You mentioned that there's a preferred bidder. Was that what were the components of their bid that resulted in them being the preferred bidder over what has obviously been, I think, revealed informally to this committee is that there were multiple bids? So why do we have a preferred bidder?
Indeed, thank you very much. As you rightly note, there has been public speculation about the nature, and some participants have shared where they were in the process. The preferred bidder was chosen on a variety of criteria through this independent process and working with a third party to determine that against the criteria that all bidders were equally evaluated against, and all were provided that capacity funding to make sure that they were putting forward the bid that responded to all of those elements.
And is there a rank order of if this preferred bidder, the deal falls through, is there someone in second, someone in third that you're going to go down the list to?
If this bidder is not successful in this process, we will have to go back to where we are in the process and make recommendations about the next steps in that regard to ensure that we are bringing forward the best possible outcome.
When the government decided to divest FFMC, did they consider, as the best deal to taxpayers, just splitting up, dismembering FFMC into various components and just selling it off as opposed to divesting it as a whole? Was that option considered or evaluated?
If I may.
Thank you for the question. The full spectrum of divestiture possibilities has been contemplated in the process of informing the minister and the government on an approach to proceeding with this bid process.
Okay, so that was a consideration?
Indeed, as were any other, the full range of possibilities in respect of how we might move forward with the corporation.
Is there, because it seems through providing capacity funding, not just breaking up an entity that was at this point losing money and actually trying to divest it, is likely that taxpayers are footing a bill so this entity can continue operating in some capacity. What was the reason for that? Was it just because this was seemed to be an important part of the supply chain for some fishermen?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, looking at the recommended approach and where we landed, the idea is that there is still value in a concerted, coordinated approach to maximizing market access for inland fish and inland fisheries, and so looking at how to retain that market space, but also recognizing that the model no longer is fit for purpose and doesn't meet the market needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. Next, for 5 minutes, we're going to go to Mr. Connors.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my colleague. I'm going back to my question. Fisheries and Oceans Canada sets the conditions of licensing in all species, on all licensing. Does the department, in its conditioning of licenses, whether it's commercial, First Nation, food and ceremony, or moderate livelihood, outline that egg-bearing female lobster is illegal to sell or bring ashore, to use, as well as an undersized lobster? Because this protects the overall fishery for all, First Nations as well as commercial.
So thank you very much for the question. And Mr. Chair, I can confirm that without having all of the license conditions here in front of me for the different communities, but by and large, all of the general conservation measures pertain
two specific
consistently.
that I identified, not by and large, the two specific.
Yeah, and again, I would have to confirm individual license conditions, but
would you confirm that information, bring it back to the committee?
Do that.
Because if the department is not enforcing those in its conditions, then it is letting down the overall fishery on the East Coast, primarily as it relates to lobster. So I'd want to know clearly what direction is given. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll give the rest of the time to my colleague.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to Mr. Williams concerning mackerel again, and I'm glad that my colleague MP Morrissey is going to be bringing forward a motion on the mackerel fishery. So I understand that there's an advisory committee on mackerel and that is being analysed, and that you're analysing data that's submitted by fishers, and there's been some question on if any data has actually been submitted. I want to go to be a bit more specific on data on spawning grounds or the migration of spawning, or movement of spawning grounds because of climate change or water warming, or how that data is considered in when you're looking at the fishery and the reopening of the fishery.
For the question, Mr. Chair. Indeed, so our science department or our science officials within the department work closely with stakeholders and harvesters in the collection of samples for Atlantic mackerel throughout Atlantic Canada. What we have seen in recent years is within certain areas in Atlantic Canada, populations can be quite high in localized areas. It's a schooling fish. It's a migratory species. It mixes with a southern contingent, and the science looks at this, and we have seen certainly in areas of Newfoundland the species, and not just this isn't unique to mackerel, but for other species as well. Appearing in different areas that we didn't see before. And so that's why it's so important for the department to ensure that when we're doing this science that we're doing it in a way that can be properly peer reviewed, and that there's consistency from year to year in terms of sampling sites, as well listening to harvesters and making sure that if there is a change that we're able to pick up on that and can respond to that. And so all of that will be taken into account as we move forward and consult and as we prepare for the next season.
Thank you. Just on that again, there's within talking to fishers, they say that there's a 2-year gap between what fishers see and what the science shows. Is there a way of narrowing that gap between the science to make sure that what the fishers see on the water is actually what science is showing?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. Indeed, we do hear from harvesters and other stakeholders that that there can be a difference between what we're seeing from our science and the peer-reviewed studies and what they're seeing on the water. In terms of that time gap and how it can be reduced, I think that points to the importance of our advisory committee process. But more than that, it speaks to the importance of an ongoing relationship and collaboration between the department and harvesters. And certainly we're engaging those harvesters throughout the year, and not just annually, but throughout to see if we are missing something and if further science work is required.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. We've got time for a shortened third round. We'll do 4, 4, and 2, starting with Mr. Small for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to the Deputy Minister is regarding estimates that are put into logbooks. And in the past season, we saw in the northern cod fishery where harvesters were charged for being over on their estimates, and they were actually given fines for having estimates that weren't close enough to reality. And this, in fact, happened when they had lots of quota remaining for the week, and if they had went over, there was time to rectify it as the weekly fishing activity continued. Is your department going to fix this for the upcoming season, or is this injustice going to continue towards our harvesters?
Thank you very much for the question. Accurate reporting in e-logs is fundamental as we look at export market opportunities, MSC certification, et cetera. But yes, working hand in glove on the wharves with harvesters to make sure that they have access to the right tools to report, and if they need to issue a correction, to work to find the right opportunity to do that.
But these weren't e-logs. This was a northern cod fishery.
Oh, sorry,
where
apologies.
e-log is not a requirement. Yep. It was paper logbook.
Yep.
And in some cases, the paper logbook was confiscated, and the harvester didn't have a logbook to actually report their catch and log it into it. They didn't have their logbook. It was taken. So then they had to stop fishing. So are you going to rectify that situation in the northern cod fishery in the upcoming season and let an estimate be an estimate?
We will work with both the region on the ground, harvesters, and our conservation and protection to make sure that we have the right tools available for the harvesters as they get out on the water to maximize time on the water and to maximize their getting of the catching of the tack.
So we've got another situation as well where there's tight parameters on bycatch, and we hear anecdotally and that bycatch levels can be higher than acceptable, and harvesters are forced to release the bycatch. Are you familiar with a landing obligation that's in place in the EU and in the UK?
I'm not familiar. Oh, pardon me. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the landing obligation, sir.
So basically, if the fish comes aboard the vessel, it has to come in, instead of being forced to be released while critically injured or whatnot, and science not even actually seeing the true picture. So it's quite detrimental to projecting what's actually in the ocean and what mortality is happening. So I'm shocked that your department hasn't studied what the European nations have done with respect to the obligation to land what's being caught?
Thank you very much for the question. We work closely with the European Union on a variety of measures, including the most recent catch certification requirements. And so when I say that I am not intimately aware of those pieces, I am confident that there are colleagues in the department who work closely with the EU to understand those. But there are scientific elements related to bycatch as well when you think about population commingling and reference stocks that we do.
So there's a conservation element here whereby, let's look at capelin fishing as an example.
So, Mr. Small, I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt here. We are over time. But with that, I'm going to move to Mr. Cormier for 4 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Once again to you, Deputy Minister, or anyone else who can answer this question, as follows. Earlier, I was talking about different fishing sectors in difficulties, others that are having less difficulties. But one issue that we've had for some years now refers to the whales in Area 12 when it comes to snow crab and lobster. And we had an event a couple of years which nearly closed down all of the lobster activities, but we were able to explain to your department that this was not something that should be done. But when it comes to snow crab fishing and also the measures for the North Atlantic whales, I know that your ministry, you're working on a strategy for the right whales and for whale-safe gear, fishing gear that would be better to avoid entanglements with right whales. So is this strategy going to be unveiled soon? Do you have a date for this, or has it been sent to the different associations as to when the strategy is going to be unveiled for the right whale? Thank you. The strategy is being finalized, reflecting not just the various consultations with the associations and directly informed by the input and lived experience. In your region in particular, you've got associations that have been really innovative in deploying whale-safe gear, as you've said, and they have directly informed our strategy. So we're about to finalize this, and we're eagerly awaiting this, given its importance for the sector. So I hope that there will be good communications with your department and the various associations, as you've said, because some of these associations are rather fearful that additional measures will be imposed on them, because since 2018, as you've said, our fishes have been incredibly strong, incredibly resilient with new gear that they've developed with the help of new technologies. But if certain measures are imposed on them that would force them to only fish with certain technological gear, would add extra stress on the industries, certain types of traps and so on that depend on technology. So you really need to listen to industry's concerns on this even before the whales arrive. Then a follow-up in terms of shrimp fishing and quotas that have not been caught by the offshore big vessels. Earlier, you were talking about marketing, but over the last 2 years, we've had a project on the seabeds together with the shrimp trawlers. But once again, even if the offshore vessels were given 60% that they're not currently fishing, but it's other vessels that are doing these tests for them, these marketing tests, through the existing allocations, could we transfer an extra quota to the shrimp fleet, given their extremely difficult position? I think that's the only means that you have in your department to actually help these shrimpers. So have you looked into these allocations to see whether it could benefit other groups within this sector? We can just take a brief answer. Yes, we're basing on science, conservation, and also economic and social reasons. So I'll look into that. I can't confirm any more than that for the moment. Thank you, Mr. Cormier. And we'll round off with Mr. Deschênes for 2 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Madame Lévesque, on the Fisheries Fund, we're dreaming here, and the government, if they announce that they're going to replenish the funds, what would be the timing between the moment when this announcement could possibly be made and then the day when the funds could actually be allocated to the different associations eagerly awaiting these funds? Well, I'll dream in Technicolor with you. So once the announcement would be made, then we'd have to work immediately with the provinces involved, Quebec, the Maritime Provinces, BC, to move ahead with the development of all of this in terms of programme arrangements. Are they going to be exactly the same? Are we going to agree on something different, etc.? And then this has to go before Treasury Board for each partner, not just the federal level, but when it comes to public funds expenditure, we have to put this through the Treasury Board to make sure that everything is correct for these direct contribution type programs and also for the sharing aspects. So in terms of officials, we're doing the work to see where we could actually launch this if that arises, if that announcement comes out. But we're in wait and see mode, but we remain optimistic. We wake up optimistic in the morning. Well, that's good to hear about that optimism. So this negotiation process with Quebec and then the Treasury Board approval and then perhaps there would be new criteria and so on. How many months would that take if all goes well? If all goes smoothly, we've got the new financial year starting the 1st of April. We're not talking about several quarters. We're talking about quite short term. And we're also looking at the various projects and applications that we've already received to see whether those projects would need to be revisited. So it'll be on 2 streams. So are we talking about 3 months in a good optimistic scenario? Yes, it depends, but yes, more or less. It will depend on negotiations. I can't commit to what the provinces are going to do on their side. But given the importance of this sector and the fact that this has really been identified unanimously as a priority, I think that everyone is really wanting to tackle this quickly. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
And panel, I'd want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and also particularly Ms. Lévesque for being here for the full 2 hours. So our next meeting is going to be on Wednesday, where we will continue our study of marine and coastal protections. But I just want to put on the members' radar that we'll need to discuss relatively soon what we're going to be studying next after the marine protected areas study. So with that, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Meeting adjourned.